perhaps we can move now to the general discussion, which I think will last 30 minutes. So we'll keep it a little bit shorter compared to the program, so to not be too late for the lunch break. But I think it's very important to now really devote some time to discussion, because there were so many things, very interesting points drop, let's say, on the table. And I will. My job will be maybe to do a first kind of recap and also maybe first question. But then please feel free to raise your hand or to write a question in the chat, and I will try to maybe orchestrate the debate. I mean, orchestrate is not really the right word, especially in the context of today, but facilitate, let's say. So we have seen actually in these amazing presentations, in a way, a complexity of the building process that is often hid by the image of architecture. Also, we have seen how the role of labor, not only actually the labor of building, but also the labor of consumption and the labor of, let's say, of the industrial machinery plays a very important role. It's clear from all presentations that certainly architecture is not built to be a shelter, but to really be an industry that either works as a form of welfare, either works as a form of consumption, as we have seen in the last presentation, either works as a way to remodel the labor force, and also to be a conduit also of habits, as we have seen also in the presentation by Davide. And of course, the question I have actually to you is of course the role of the architect and the role of the builder. I mean, whether let's say in this process, not just the builder, but somehow also the architect somehow is completely absorbed and reorganizing this kind of machinery. And at the same time, let's say the architect, as Davide said very sarcastically, but also in a very effective way, played the role of the illusionist. I mean, at least the architect has still this prerogative of create an illusion of authorship. But in fact, what you all describe seems to be that there is a machinery at work that produce architecture, that also produce the consumption of architecture, the finance of architecture. And so I would like you to reflect really on how the architect and the builder somehow coexist or relate to each other in this condition.
Well, if nobody wants to start, I can start saying that one thing that for me it's quite strong, if you want, discovery in the Brazilian context, which is what I've studied the most, is that not discovery, but let's say an important fact is that, for example, a figure like Oscar Niemeyer has a prestige that, culturally speaking, let's say, that is absolutely unimaginable. Maybe just not even Le Corbusier, I think, has ever reached that kind of notoriety. Not even Norman Foster's today or whatever, because in a sense, because of the project of Brasilia. And I think it's quite, of course, because also all other projects he has done, countless projects he has done, but in a way, I think that, he was, of course, a member of the Communist Party, but of course, he literally argued in texts, not just at the bar, let's say, that for him, the profession was one thing, and the political commitment or the political ideology was another thing, and that these two things must remain separate. Which this was the very strong point of conflict with Villanova Artigas, which was, let's say, the most important architect of São Paulo at the same time, which actually is also the master of Architettura Nova, so it's their root in a way, which was also a prominent member of the Communist Party, but thought that actually practicing architecture was a form of political engagement and political action in a way, and that's where Architettura Nova took even to the further level, let's say, to a most radical position, this idea. I was quite interested in the way in which Kati was describing how products companies, let's say, or manufacturing companies attempted to allure the architect, even with some fancy graphic design, etc. I think we are going towards a moment in which the architects are trying to allure construction companies to do something, which is I think interesting, perhaps. And for me, it's about also let's say that one of the strong responsibility of architects, especially in modern times, is that they really spend their reputation, in a sense, or their prestige in the construction of a project that maybe they didn't even necessarily agree with, but that was commanded by forces that were in a sense larger than what they thought was possible to confront, in a way, no? And the construction of Brasilia, for me, it's really an economic project. It's not just a political project. It's also a project of economical of capital accumulation that has allowed to start in a substantial way Brazilian industrialization. I don't know if this actually is a question or anything, but I think that it's in some ways the role of the architect is probably has been, let's say, in the history of modernism also a bit overrated, I would say, from this point of view.
Yeah,
and that has been much more instrumental to larger projects that had to do with industry, had to do with, well, as Maria was saying, also with colonialism, with larger movements that then in a way also foster the creativity of the architect, let's put it like that. I thought that the examples of Maria, of these arches, of these solutions, let's say, were also extremely interesting, because
actually, what I found interesting across the presentation of Kati, Davide, Maria, but also in Giorgio's, is that even within what we can consider the welfare or let's say state-driven economies, somehow consumption is the very goal, is the expansion of markets, also the skilling of labor, and the mass production of, and therefore the skilling of any capability to somehow intervene in a more individual ad hoc manner. So in a way, what seems to emerge that in a way welfare projects are, to a certain extent, also projects of creating subjects that are meant to really depend then on economic institutions or state institutions, almost in a very kind of dependent way, without any possibility then to reclaim something more autonomous.
It's the very definition of domestication, by the way, because domestication means exactly that a number of species, vegetal, animal, and the humans, of course, become so interdependent that they cannot live without each other, right? So, the grain that we eat today cannot survive without man, and we cannot survive without that. And so I think that what you're describing is totally a process of the domestication, actually, of the population with other means and on another scale, of course. But I think it's exactly that, where there's a process of mutual dependency that is being constructed.
Yeah. There are a few questions, actually. Yes, please, Kati. There are also questions in the chat, but maybe, Kati, you can answer first.
I just wanted to go back to your beginning question about this sort of relationship between the architect and the builder. And I suppose, although in a way I had this, the lens of looking at that through the specification kind of has its own limits and its own peculiar sort of light that it casts. I mean, I suppose, and I think this was really shown beautifully in Maria's presentation, is that, you know, that this role changes. So perhaps, I mean, again, and I'm sort of really looking at this 1930s period where sort of I'm arguing that proprietary specification is this kind of new role that the architect takes, and to, you know, and the question is still open to what extent, you know, how that really plays out with respect to labour or to building labour. But you know, if you think of other, but then you think of other periods. So you think of the sort of the beginning of, you know, of the sort of late 18th century and the early 19th century, and there it's much more this kind of you know, the domination of building work, the sort of the division, you know, to orchestrating the division of labour and so on, and that's kind of you know, super reflected, or you see it very strongly in the specification. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is that I don't think it's, you know, it's by no means one relation, and I think that's when, as soon as you start to look at it, there's a sort of that these relationships change, and maybe what's also interesting is to what extent that gets reflected, if you like, in architectural theory or in architectural thinking or discipline or not. You know, these sort of huge changes that are happening at the level of the organisation of building labour and contracts, with the architect, you know, operating there, and to what extent they kind of impact the sort of the so-called sort of autonomous discipline of architectural design. You know.
I see actually questions in the chat, so I would encourage the people who actually have written the question in the chat to come forward and to maybe say the question directly to the speakers.
Maybe, Pier Vittorio, if I could, meanwhile they prepare, I could just bridge a bit the gap by saying that, in fact, what is interesting, why I was waiting to hear also the other three presenters, is because the Crystal Palace as a project was realized without an architect having a principal role in it. So it was really conceived by an architect, then it was the engineers themselves who became in charge. Also, then it was, let's say, the heart of the Midlands and the production sites there, sending all the material to Hyde Park. So in fact, I think it becomes quite interesting to see also how we as architects celebrate a project, whereas in fact, not an architect had the kind of a leading role or a role that was really somehow as a participator in this process. And also something that became interesting, especially in relation to what you mentioned, the dependent subjects, and potentially I think I see it could come across all the presentations, is this aspect of maybe balance and visibility and invisibility. For example, there is always this kind of struggle of how, on one hand, there is an attempt to really create such subjects, but at the same time, whether it's through the exhibitions, whether it's through the case of this kind of engagement of women on board, or whether it's through this kind of complexity and on the sides, etc., it becomes almost like a tension that is tried to maintain between those who initiate these projects, but also those who are somehow appear to be the ones benefiting from them.
Yes. In a way, it seems that architecture really performs this kind of division, or it's meant really to perform this division. Yes, that's a very important point. Anyone that wrote the question on the chat want to come forward? And
I would like to ask a question, because the interesting aspects of these presentations is the fact that architects somehow participate in the whole the process of building. But nowadays what we see is that the process of buildings are becoming more virtual, and then they are kind of creating a process where architects and even the labor force is separated from the process in a much broader sense. I talk about off-site manufacturing nowadays and lean processes in construction. So I would like to ask Katie, because I found very interesting all the presentations, but Katie was perhaps the most present one, because it talks about of how the market has some needs, and the architects are some kind of a little cog in the all-round process of consumption, production, and creation of products. And what I think it's curious about all these processes is that nowadays, what I've seen as an architect, and the concept of an architect as illusionist is very important, because as the late capitalist societies are becoming more virtual and selling experiences rather than products, this process is of trying to separate architects, consumers, and producers and labor force from the production, using offsite manufacturing, CNC machines, CLT, cross-lam, everything else. I think this makes this kind of virtualization of all the process. I'm not sure I'm clear about my questions, but I think there is something very important in this process I would like to talk about with people who have presented. Thank you. I would like to extend further because architect as illusionist, I think, is some kind of thing that presents an architect as the creator of simulacra in the society of expectable, and then the architect as an illusionist is a very strong image of what we do. I am, as an architect, I produce every day illusions, and I try to convey to my clients their dreams. This is a cliche, but their dreams, their constructed dreams. And this is a very boring thing, because we are selling something that they see on the market, they see on the internet, and they ask for things. And what is very strong in my practice is that we produce things that in the end, there are things that try to convey something that we do not achieve, and our clients do not achieve as well. You understand? Excuse me.
I can. I mean, this is for me. It's really an important topic, I have to say. Also because I'm not an historian. I look at this. I mean, at architecture, let's say, from the point of view of the designer, maybe differently from Katie, that is a proper, serious scholar, let's say. So I think that for me, there is always in the back of my mind the question of, okay, but what the architect should do? Who is the architect? What's the role? And that's where I think for me, the work of Architettura Nova was very interesting, because it's a slap in the face in a way, no? And not only for us today and for the architects at that time, in a way. And I think that you're completely right that in the contemporary practice, I think that the architect almost doesn't get to decide anything about the production of the building. It's just a composer of, if not prefabricated, pre-thought. Not prefabricated in the sense of thinking, not prefabricated in the sense of the factory, but pre-thought solutions in a way that are, it doesn't matter if you cast concrete in situ. That way of casting concrete in situ, you have nothing to say about it. If not, okay, let's do it a little bit more pink or a little bit more blue or whatever. But it's, I'm not sure, but probably it's very difficult now to tackle this issue from this point of view, because I think it's really very hard on a significant scale, let's say, to return to influence these giant industries in a way. On the other hand, I have to say, just to maybe make the discourse even more complex, that for me, the architect as illusionist is, of course, a negative connotation. But there is also something deep down that is positive in a sense that relates with the symbolic aspect of architecture. And that I think, for example, in the curves of Niemeyer, you can definitely, just to make a whatever example, you can definitely find, and that is also something that relates deep down man with architecture in a way. And so we also need that illusion to a certain extent. And I probably still believe that that illusion could be used in a productive way, let's say, or in a different mode of production. But it's a very tough challenge, I would say, at least from where I stand right now.
Yeah, just I mean, one of the things about this particular research is that, of course, that it's kind of one of the things it's supposed to do is to sort of denaturalize the business of choosing products as part of the architect's practice. But on the other hand, we're also in a time when architects don't do that. I mean, you know, a design and build contract, you don't do that. You know, these decisions are left to the contractors. So one of the things that I've looked at, not so contemporary now, I have to say, it's probably about 10 years old. So this particular sort of piece of research, but was just to look at the kind of performance-based specifications, particularly on really huge kind of building projects, where they're kind of emptied of actual material choices. It's all about describing materials through what they'll achieve. So it's almost polar opposite of what was happening in the 1930s. And of course, you know, that's about saving money. The contractor's doing things that are most expedient, but it's also about litigation. So that, you know, architects are abnegating from taking responsibility for material decisions as well. So I was just really thinking, you know, it's very, I think Maria had this characterization of kind of what architects do now is produce more complexity. And I mean, perhaps in this sort of, you know, perhaps that's one way of thinking about it. But the role of the architect has changed again, at least from this kind of perspective of thinking about it from materials point of view. And I think that leads. When you read these specifications, I mean, the building is just sort of is abstract. I mean, it is literally like a drawing again. It's just sort of, you know, this is this abstract sort of series of behaviors arranged, sort of arranged according to the architectural drawing. So it's a very odd kind of object that's being described.
Maybe I want to just make a comment on what has been said, and also a question to all of you, since you're all pedagogues and involved also in teaching. And actually, yes, it's true that you know, architects have lost a kind of knowledge of this very, very complex process. And of course, you have described very well how the organization of labor force, it's something that, of course, was often the crucial goal of many of these constructive innovations. But it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, I will repeat this provocation also at the end of the symposium, that one of the biggest problem in us understanding this kind of larger picture is also the fact that this understanding of architecture that you are pursuing in your research is quite absent from, let's say, more theoretical discussions about what architecture is about. In a way, the authorship of the architect, the actual building as an object, you know, the Crystal Palace being this pure abstract monument, almost like a Parthenon, as Giorgio said, in a way, is reinforced by many narratives of how we discuss architecture, where in fact this kind of very complex context is completely removed. So, for example, I'm thinking a lot about all this literature that we read about modernity and standardization, and then these window frames, these catalogs of window frames. These are far more abstract and radical than anything produced by the great masters of modern architecture. But yet they were just like a brochure for let's say, for women's, for consumers, let's say, of products. So my question to you is how we can bring to the fore this kind of discussion, not as a kind of technical, as a technical module next to architecture design, but really as the very problem of design, of the very problem of producing architecture. I mean, I know this is a very ambitious question. I don't expect like a curriculum to be sketched by you, but how you, in your own practice, in your own teaching, academic practice, in your teaching, are involving these questions, with the students, and are the students actually eager to engage with these issues, which often are very dense and complex and difficult to understand?
Maybe to such an ambitious question, I can give you a very non-ambitious answer. There is actually the modest response that Georgios and I actually gave together a couple of years ago in the course that we used to teach together actually at the Royal College of Art. We had, with some colleagues, of course, some of which actually I see here also, Gili and Valerio. So the course actually was titled The Politics of the Structure, so quite similar actually to the topic that we are investigating today. And I think that what was interesting of what we were trying to do beyond the lecture series is that we asked the students to reflect on their case studies through models. And of course, so the models then became an interpretative way to reflect on the material on the procurement chain of the material, on the way the material then was reworked into specific techniques. So we had about 70 students, so you can imagine that the responses were very varied. But I think for us, it had to do both with what you're saying, so with putting actually the problem itself actually to the foreground, and being very clear with that, but also trying to change the method, which I think is something that is quite important. So sometimes actually when we struggle to focus on a specific problem, changing the very practice of how we actually we study and how we learn, sometimes it's useful just because it gives you a moment of estrangement and it gives you a new perspective. And for us, actually, the technique of the model was very productive. Actually, we found a number of things that we ourselves didn't know actually in the case studies of the students. Maybe actually Georgios also has a perspective on that. And I wanted to actually raise this question of method just because I wanted to make an observation on what was discussed earlier about the relationship between client, contractor, production of materials and architect. I find it very striking that we haven't tried in the last centuries actually to repurpose this chain of relationships, and they have stayed essentially the same. They have become more complex. They have shifted, of course, through time, but essentially there's always an architect, there's always somebody actually who constructs the building, and it's not the same person, and then there's a client. So in a way, there's the roles basically of these actors. In many cases, I wouldn't say always, but they are the same. And we know that from other disciplines, there have been substantial attempts to actually estrange actually this kind of functioning. Just to make a very stupid example, John Cage completely, killed the relationship between audience, performer, and composer, for instance, in music, right? And we could do something very similar also in architecture. Some of our peers did it. I think it's great that we have Hugh here actually, speaking in the afternoon, for instance. And of course, the case of Architettura Nova is another case in point. But I think we should really kind of, conceptually, methodologically, completely, explode this chain of relationships. And so, yeah, sometimes actually when you don't have yet new content before, it does help to look at things in a different way. And for us, this kind of, unfunctioning or estranging came through the use of models in the teaching of architectural history and theory, which of course is quite bizarre, if you want, as a method. And I think I was really lucky actually to be able to work with people like Georgios, and I mean specifically Georgios actually, who were really willing to take on this challenge. It was not easy at first.
Sorry, Maria, if I can add something exactly on that, is that if you want, the double response of Sergio Ferro is first, when the dictatorship come in, forget about architecture and get the guns, and then do 1 year of prison and torture. That's his response. And second, when you are exiled in France, you don't do architecture anymore, but actually start teaching and open a school of experimental construction site in Grenoble. Is an aspect actually that I haven't studied as thoroughly as the built work, let's say, but in a conversation with him, he told me once, look, we put together this school with a very specific program with, an entire basically course, not only on the construction side, but also on the theory of it. And in a state school, and the state wasn't happy until the entire political part of it was excised from it. So there is also this aspect that somehow, at least in that condition, when you push the boundary of something, the machine, let's say, push back, and you are also confronted with the impossibility of doing certain things, which of course means that you have to try again, probably. And I think Sergio is doing it by, on the verge of 90 years old, is still writing, still doing stuff. He's gonna see this symposium in a recorded form, and he was very excited about it. And he's doing with Katie this project on the translation of his work. But I think I wanted to mention this because they all thought as well. Teaching was also part from the very beginning of the way in which they elaborated that project in a way. So I think it's a really important aspect.
Georgios, you want to?
Yes, maybe. I think it was precisely the discussions with Maria and the other colleagues a few years ago that in fact pushed me to really investigate this part and really try to address construction details, etc. And especially this year in the studio here that we are developing, it could be said that it can be a self, in a sense, a design-built studio. But the very interesting thing that we are actually trying to put forward is to also have a client for that project, meaning that we have to somehow manage and mold ourselves. I think this is the key thing within an aspect of time and speed. So how would it be the case within a project of a self-built one that you potentially, if you develop within your colleagues or within a friend or within a cooperative, time and speed might be understood in a different way, could be potentially pushed by the pressures, if you can say, that exist outside maybe of an academic context and outside of a environment which is somehow a bit more protected, rather than when you go outside and you really do have, in fact, strict deadlines to follow. You have a very strict kind of maybe set of lists and regulations you have to complete, etc. So how could you respond? In fact, now the students are on site for the past 2 weeks, really putting a structure together, and it's in fact, it will not be finished, but this is, I think, the challenge. How would it be the response to an unfinished thing? Just because we have taken our time and we have really investigated some things a bit more, some things like, in a sense, as architects, not follow the logic of submitting a project on the deadline, but rather leaving it unfinished in a way.
Yeah, thank you, Georgios. Of course, this question of time is also very, very important, and often it was really time that was used as a way to really the skill to hurry up basically builders and remove the capacity for them to really think and so I think that I think we are miraculously on time. So I think we can actually perhaps finish this very long but very interesting and fruitful morning session. We will have another session for discussion, which hopefully will be also a little bit longer. Sorry if I cut now the very interesting conversation. I also am very happy that there was some exchange in the chat. So thank you very much for this wonderful morning. Thanks to all the audience. Incredibly numerous people. Thank you all for being being with us, even in those circumstances. So it's 1:30 London time, of course. So London time, unfortunately. Unfortunately, we have to refer to that time because we are in principle, we are all at the Architectural Association. We will have an hour lunch break and we will reconvene, all of us, at 2:30 with Hugh Strange, who will introduce us to the very interesting work of Walter Siegel. So see you actually in exactly 1 hour at 2:30. Thank you.